President Yoon, status, current government, all that and more next on the Capitol Cable. All right, good morning to those of you in DC, good evening to those of you in Korea, good day to those of you around the world. I'm Mark Lippert, the host and moderator of the CSIS Capitol Cable. Welcome to a special Friday edition of the Capitol Cable to cover the deadly serious, very severe situation with regard to domestic politics in the Republic of Korea. And joining us, two special guests that are no strangers to the Capitol Cable, in fact, seasoned pros, but expert, of course, on all things domestic as well as foreign policy with respect to the Republic of Korea. And joining us, let me just give a proper introduction to them. First, Timothy Martin, head of the Wall Street Journal in Korea. People have been reading his coverage, I know, very, very closely on this issue. Timothy, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
All right, excellent. You're coming back so often, I think we're going to have to give you a frequent flyer card here, right? So get you access to a private jet. So there you go. And of course, we have Dr. Andrew Yeo, professor. He's at Brookings, Catholic University, multiple publications on the Republic of Korea. Andrew, welcome back to the show as well.
Thanks. Great to be back here, Mark.
All right, excellent. Usually we go through longer introductions and bios, but there's so much to cover here today. Please look up our outstanding guests' bios online. Moreover, you've heard me say them before, so although it bears repeating, for the interest of brevity and substance, we want to get right to it here today. All right, let me start with Mr. Martin. Mr. Martin, let me turn to you. You've just written a really interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal in the last day or so, detailing what is happening in Korea. Can you walk us through the current status with respect to impeachment, Yoon Suk Yeol's arrest, and then the implications and way forward here? And again, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks. Sure. What day is it? Where are we? There's a lot to clear here with the process. So maybe I just start briefly where we're at right now and then try and very quickly summarize how we got here. Yoon Suk Yeol right now is detained. He's near the special investigator's office where he's attempted to be questioned over the last couple of days. He's refused to answer. So right now, investigators are trying to get a more permanent formal warrant to keep him arrested. And we'll get clarity on this in about 14 hours. It's Saturday afternoon here in Seoul. And that will determine whether Yoon walks out or he's detained for a longer period. That starts a shot clock where for the next 20 days, a combination of the special investigators who are trying to interrogate him now with the prosecutors who will decide whether to indict him or not, have to make up their minds about this case against Yoon, which includes insurrection or allegations of insurrection, which is one of the few charges that South Korean presidential immunity does not cover. Now, how do we get here? Well, December 3rd was the martial law decree. President Yoon was impeached on December 14th. And that kicked off a process where we now have concurrent but sort of separate legal processes against President Yoon. His impeachment trial at the Constitutional Court, that started sort of public formal hearings just a few days ago. On Tuesday, Yoon was scheduled to show up. He refused, in part because his lawyers cited security reasons, which I think we can understand as they thought he might be arrested or detained on the way to that court. The following day, Wednesday, President Yoon was detained by these special investigators. Thursday, there was another Constitutional Court hearing for his impeachment, and that runs us through today. So, and these two legal proceedings matter and sort of intertwine because if President Yoon is ousted from office, and by that I mean the Constitutional Court upholds the legislation's impeachment of Yoon, then President Yoon critically loses his Secret Service protection, and he would also lose his presidential immunity. So he's very vulnerable, legally speaking. That process kicked off last month. They have up until mid-May to finish, but past practice has sort of shown with impeachment trials here, they'll probably be done in a matter of months. So we're looking at sort of early spring timeline potentially. For Yoon for that impeachment decision to be upheld, they need 6 of the 8 judges to back the impeachment. And this is unfolding during President Yoon's potential criminal case. And that's what we're sort of, what we've seen a lot of the action in recent days. So describing it is quite a mouthful. It's quite confusing. They are interrelated in very essential ways, but there's been a lot of action. So President Yoon right now is detained. We'll find out just by tomorrow, essentially, if it will be for a longer period. And it'll be a few weeks after that, basically, if President Yoon's going to remain behind bars throughout his impeachment trial and likely his criminal trial.
Great update. Thanks, Timothy. Really, really outstanding stuff there. Can I just ask you a question that people have asked me in terms of why have these criminal charges been brought in the middle of impeachment, right? I think folks familiar with the U.S. system, right, know that, most presidents have at least a strong degree of immunity, and usually you impeach, then you pursue charges. Or at least wait to the president to leave office, right? And why in this case has the prosecutor's office felt so compelled to come forward in the middle of these impeachment proceedings?
It's both prosecutors, I guess in this case, special investigators at this point,
Yes.
But also the opposition party. There's a lot of public pressure to hold Yoon accountable for the martial law decree. Now, the dynamics here on the ground here in Korea are sort of shifting, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But you have 2 very highly motivated parties to do something. With the investigators, they are actually a relatively newly created group. They only target high-ranking government officials, including the president. So this is sort of their first case on sort of a big national scale. I think they want to prove that they deserve to be there. And then they're fueled by the opposition party. So the opposition party could have framed the martial law decision, Yoon's martial law decision, in a variety of ways. But they decided to sort of describe and frame Yoon as the ringleader of an insurrection. So while criminally, yes, this becomes actually much easier if he's ousted from office. Politically, and I guess on some levels, the public wants to see some matter of accountability. And by describing him as an insurrectionist, letting President Yoon sit at the presidential compound, a free man, as for weeks, months, that might not be palatable to certainly the opposition party base, perhaps the investigators as well, who are meanwhile indicting other central characters of the martial law. So it would seem a bit discomfiting if Yoon's just left alone throughout this whole process. And I will say, during the Park Geun-hye impeachment, different set of circumstances, but she was not detained until after she was ousted from office. But again, it's actually a much different system. Just in a matter of recent years, they reformed, made pretty sweeping prosecutorial reforms. So it sort of shifts the power base, who does what and when. So I think there's some sort of newness here, and you can obviously see the motivations from the various parties.
That's fair. And then I guess the other thing with the difference with Park Geun-hye is, I guess, the charges themselves, right? More or less, yes. I'm going to paraphrase poorly and oversimplify: influence peddling versus insurrection, or with respect to due process afforded to Yoon Suk Yeol here in this case. But the charges were different too. All right. Well, one last question. Then I'm going to get to Andrew. You talk about the public clamor to do something is a possible motivating force here for these charges that will happen concurrently, or could happen concurrently with the impeachment process. But tell me if I'm incorrect here, but Yoon Suk Yeol's popularity has actually increased significantly in the past couple of weeks. What to make of that, Timothy?
I think we need to be a bit careful to say President Yoon's popularity has increased, but I think what's increasingly clear is that his party's support and approval has risen, skyrocketed actually, right in the aftermath. Just to give you some perspective, right in the aftermath of the martial law decree and when Yoon was impeached in mid-December, about 3/4 of South Koreans supported him, the impeachment for him to be removed from office. Today, that number sits at 57% of South Korean public. Now, I think the vast majority of South Koreans do not agree with Yoon's decision for martial law, but the execution of the arrest warrant against the very sort of high-profile, high-stakes, tense arrest attempts, the failed first one, the successful second one, and also I think the very aggressive tactics taken by the opposition party. Again, calling Yoon an insurrectionist, that's cost support by moderates, even some conservatives. And actually, again, I think the polling was to be a bit sensitive about, but the polling shows that actually, as of a Gallup poll that came out today, more Koreans are supporting the ruling Conservative Party than the opposition, which is quite remarkable. About 39% in this most recent poll. They're just asked, which party you support. 39% of South Koreans support the ruling conservatives. That's up 15 percentage points from their low right after impeachment. The opposition Democratic Party, they're at 36%, and that's down 12 percentage points from their high. So just in a matter of weeks, we've seen a falling popularity with the opposition party, and actually a remarkable return by the conservatives. So where does this leave us? This leaves us almost politically in a similar stalemate that we were before martial law. But sort of remarkably, the conservatives now have a slight edge. And that's a pretty remarkable development on top of a remarkable development on top of a remarkable development. It's been shifting very quickly here.
And just to draw you out on one point, just to maybe perhaps opine on one point, the difference, Park Geun-hye, Yoon Suk Yeol impeachment, right? Park Geun-hye, the support for her party collapsed, never recovered, and there was a landslide victory by the Minjudong in the election, right? This is a very different dynamic than the last time we saw impeachment in 16-17. All right, excellent, Mr. Martin, as always. Let's go to Dr. Yeo here. Andrew, you were just in Seoul, so very interested in your take on events and comments on Tim's very excellent laydown. I'm also just fascinated in your perspective in what's happening in terms of these shifting dynamics in domestic politics, in addition to the actual impeachment proceedings. But Andrew, the floor, Dr. Yeo, Andrew, the floor is yours.
Sure. Well, thanks. And I'll just pick up from where Tim had left off. I did take a trip to South Korea last week. It was for a conference. I was there with a few other think tankers from Washington, D.C., including your colleague at CSIS, Mark, Sid Seiler. So we were there for a conference to talk about Trump's inauguration of the U.S.-Korea alliance. But I did have a day on my own to go to the National Assembly to meet a few National Assembly representatives from both the opposition and the ruling party. We met with some South Korean think tankers and a few policy officials. So, of course, it's a very small sample, but one of the takeaways that I got was that, at least for the lawmakers, I was on one hand, I was hoping that they would be thinking more about the country, what's best for the nation moving forward. At that time, President Yoon hadn't been arrested yet, but they were in the process of trying. This is the Corruption Investigation Office. They were in the process of trying a second attempt or coming up with a game plan to detain him. But when I met with lawmakers from both sides, it was very clear that they see the upcoming months as absolutely critical for what happens next, whether there's, if Yoon is impeached, there's going to be elections. And so I see that there's both strategizing very much to see how can they one up the opposition. And what Tim was saying is that the people, the People Power Party, the 국민의힘, the PPP, that their popularity has increased, not decreased after martial law. And it's not to say that there's support for Yoon more than that they're not so excited about the prospects of the opposition. In this case, it would be opposition leader Lee Jae-myung, who's the front runner for elections if they were to be held today. But they feel that, as this is the PPP, the ruling party feels that as more time lapses, that actually time is in their favor. So on one hand, Lee Jae-myung, he also has multiple convictions or indictments, and he's been convicted on election fraud. He's supposed to show up to court as well too. He has these summons, but he's been delaying, and so the PPP feel that as this drags out, public sentiment is going to also be upset at the opposition Democratic Party for playing political games, and so they feel that they need to drag out this process. Whereas the opposition party, you get the sense that they're trying to speed up things, that they want to quickly detain President Yoon, that they want to move the process along because they feel that while this is still hot, they need to move forward. While they still have the memory of the martial law imminent, you can feel that they have this, they're trying to strategize. And so that's where I find that lawmakers, they're very focused in what are the next steps so that they can come out on top if there is a special election.
And so, Andrew, excellent laydown and really interesting backdrop on the domestic politics of this. In addition to slowing down or speeding up the process, right, for possible political advantage, it's probably not the best term, but in terms of political positioning, let me put it that way. What are the main public messaging arguments that are being invoked by both sides as this one arrest warrant issue unfolds and two impeachment unfolds? What are the principal, I guess, what I would say, the principal political messages, and how are those resonating with the Korean people?
Yeah, so of course they're completely different narratives. You've seen on the PPP side, there are lawmakers who are continuing to defend President Yoon. There was lawmakers that embedded themselves within, they were at President Yoon's house to try to protect him from being pulled away by the police. So they were part of the barricade. And they feel that the martial law is unjust, that the opposition, this entire time, the opposition has been out to get Yoon, to go after him. And so they find this illegal. Now, I should say that the PPP there are different cleavages. There are, for lack of a better term, there are factions here. So there is a moderate group I found in my visit to the National Assembly. Some lawmakers were saying that they didn't agree with this idea of ruling party members showing up to Yoon's house to try to block the police because they feel that the government, has concluded that Yoon needs to be detained, and so they should follow that process. They should follow the rule of law. But they said the reason why they should follow that process is because if Lee Jae-myung needs to show up to court, if he needs to be arrested or detained, the Democratic Party could say the same thing about the ruling party. We're just using the same playbook from the ruling party. And I also noticed that some of the ruling party members, they actually want to keep Lee Jae-myung politically alive. So they so he was convicted. So now the public knows that he's found guilty, but there's a final step at some point where the Supreme Court has to review the ruling of the conviction. It was really interesting to hear some people say that they don't want it to get to this third stage, the Supreme Court review. And that would mean that Lee Jae-myung can no longer run for president. I think he's suspended for 10 years from running as president. So he would be out of the picture for elections. And I asked, well, I thought that was the whole point, to try to get Lee Jae-myung out of the picture. You wanted to remove him from the political scene. And they said, no, we want to keep him politically alive because that's our best hope or chance for winning election. Because there's so much political baggage with Lee Jae-myung, if the ruling party fields a moderate candidate, they might be able to win some of the centrist votes. Now, this is not, I think this isn't unanimous thinking within the ruling party. But again, my point is that there's different cleavages on how to navigate the next step. So it's surprising to hear that they want to keep Lee Jae-myung alive. They want him to run because they feel that if they can run a more centrist candidate or someone, just to throw out a name, the Seoul mayor, Oh Se-hoon, who isn't so tied or connected to Yoon, he may have a chance. He could win some of the middle voters, and they certainly know that the hardcore Yoon supporters, of course, they're not going to like, the mayor coming out that if he's not aligned with Yoon, he's not part of the core base, but they sure as hell are not going to vote for Lee Jae-myung. So that is sort of their strategy. But then, of course, the hardcore, Yoon base supporters, they want to find someone that's very conservative. They floated names like the mayor of Daegu, Hong Jung-pyo. But then some of the moderates believe that he's not going to be able to capture the middle vote, so they're not going to win. We're not seeing so far the ruling party fracture like the Park Geun-hye period. They're trying to hold together because they learned their lesson last time. Like they're not, if they splinter, they're not going to win anything. So for now, the PPP is holding it together. The narratives on the Democratic Party side, the opposition party, of course, they're saying this party, how can they support a president who talks about liberal democracy and freedom, but then is insisting that martial law was the right path. He has party members that are also towing that line. This person is, so President Yoon would be unfit. The PPP has no longer the mandate to lead this country. And of course, that's their narrative. But different strategies, different narratives, just a lot of politicking from both the ruling and the opposition party.
Okay, fascinating, very interesting, and as you noted, very different from the Park Geun-hye go-round, for lack of a better term. All right, Tim, over to you, and just one sort of final set of questions on the domestic front. Just pick up on the fracturing point with can the PPP, hold together a unified front in the face of increasing in the face of these legal proceedings, right? I mean, they're left with defending martial law, this invocation. Is that a viable strategy going forward? Or is their best argument process, dragging it out? Is it something else? What does PPP do to try to get through this and not fracture, picking up on Andrew's last point?
Andrew, I think totally nailed it. I think if you were to look at the front runners, any type of snap election, number one probably is Lee Jae-myung. He's the country's most popular politician, but he's also the most unpopular. I'd say close number two is anyone but Lee Jae-myung. So I think that's the key differentiator from the Park Geun-hye impeachment when the conservatives did fracture to now. They have a reason. They have a clear person to try and thwart and avoid, whether you're actually sort of on the hard right or moderate. There are a lot of people who just do not like Lee Jae-myung. And I would go back just a few years ago when President Yoon ran against Lee Jae-myung in 2022 for the election. I remember back then, I was here and reporting on it, people called it the race of unlikables. And it was sort of a similar dynamic. It was less, I really like this candidate. It was more, I dislike the other one. So I think at a very contentious moment, South Korea was politically divided then. I think the martial law incident has further splintered the country's politics and certainly how people feel about it. I think that'll be a more catalyzing development for certainly people on the right, potentially people in the middle. Now that's ultimately going to be the political fight here. Whoever the PPP does put up, it's got to be somebody. and I think the insiders I've spoken with, they are sensitive to another non-politician. I mean, Yoon was a career prosecutor, a political neophyte. We perhaps saw some of the drawbacks of someone who does not have the political immune system to deal with the opposition. So I think a sort of new face, unheard of candidate might be difficult, but of course the known names also bring their own drawbacks. So I think I think the delay tactics are part of it because this is a race against time. It's a race against time for Yoon, what's going to happen with him, and at what timeline does the snap election begin, and potential legal concerns with Lee Jae-myung. So
Right.
I think that's what we'll see.
All right,
Yeah.
excellent. One
Can
quick
I add-
follow
Sure.
to both of you. Oh, go ahead, Andrew. Yeah, and can I just
Yeah.
let me get this
Sure,
question, and so
sure.
you can answer it, Andrew, too. What are you two watching in this space in terms of who will emerge, as a leading candidate? Are you looking at polls? Are you looking at factions? What signs what indicators and warnings, to use an intelligence community term, are you looking for in terms of who might emerge from all this political jockeying as a true front runner, especially on the PPP side? But Andrew, please come on your intervention first.
Sure. Well, let me just answer your question and then get to what I was going to say because it's not unrelated.
Okay.
For the PPP, it's Hong Jung-pyo is the most popular figure for the conservative base, for the Yoon supporters. He's also a former party leader. He's well known among the party, but as I mentioned before, some believe because he's so conservative and tied to Yoon, that he's not going to be able to get the centrist voters. So let's say that roughly 30% of the country really support Lee Jae-myung, 30% of the country support the conservative, Yoon or a conservative figure. That still leaves 40% within the middle. So who's going to capture that? And you're not going to capture those voters with Hong Jung-pyo. So that's why I mentioned Oh Se-hoon, who is, he was this is his second time as mayor. He's quite. He was popular the first time around. I haven't checked his polls recently, but some think that he might be removed enough from Yoon to be acceptable, and he has enough name recognition that people would prefer him over Lee Jae-myung, who has, as I mentioned, these legal cases hanging over him, not other political baggage. So that might be one strategy. Of course, it would mean that the mayor would have to step down from his position if there is an election later this spring or early summer, and that would lead a vacuum. And so the risk is that you might not win the presidency, and then you might lose this kind of this precious political position of having the ruling party having a mayor being the mayor of Seoul. So there are some risks to that. Other names that have been floated are like Han Dong-hoon, who's now out of the party. He was the one who kind of stepped in and said martial law is wrong almost immediately against Yoon, and but there's a lot of conservatives, Yoon supporters who see him as a traitor, and so it remains to be seen whether he would be able to come back to the party. The point that I wanted to make, though, was on the Democratic Party of Korea side. I was asking some lawmakers, both on the ruling and the opposition side, is there any talking or quiet talk about fielding another candidate other Lee Jae-myung? Because yes, he's the front runner right now. If there's an election today, he would garner the most votes, we believe. But because of the political baggage that surrounds him, could there be another candidate, someone who isn't tainted to scandals? And surprisingly, they said no. Apparently, party discipline is quite high. It's very strong. And, one person said, they think because Lee Jae-myung has purged all his opponents within the party, some folks in the Moon Jae-in faction, that he's really built a good party discipline. And so that everyone is really backing Lee Jae-myung, and there isn't really another candidate out there. And these are just now my personal views, but I'm a little bit disappointed, though, because I feel that if Lee Jae-myung, who is the front runner, is elected as president, that some of these problems that continue to persist with democracy, the deep polarization, the abuse of power, because the corruption charges that were around Lee Jae-myung is when he was the mayor of Seongnam City. There was a housing scandal. When he was a governor of Gyeonggi Province, there was a charge that he had given $5 million through a company to North Korea. Those are signs of abuse of power. You're using your office for some kind of political gain. Of course, the courts have to play this out, give him his due process as well. But in terms of kind of power and abuse, going after the opposition, there could be trials. I think some of these issues surrounding South Korean democracy would not necessarily be resolved, even if the processes and the institutions play out in a way that shows the strength of South Korean democracy. At the same time, I feel like we may run into the same problem that we did in the previous, there may be another impeachment trial that comes up at some point again. So I'll stop there. I think I've gone on way too long.
No, never too long, Andrew. That's outstanding. Tim, anything to add? Otherwise, I'm going to move on to kind of foreign policy implications here. But anything to add in terms of who might also emerge here or what you're watching in this space?
I think Andrew said a lot, spot on. I think one name that's emerged from recent polling is Kim Moon-soo. He's the Minister of the Environment. He has been backing President Yoon and has said that he thought the charges against him and the way they were going about it was unfair. He's a sort of known figure among conservative circles. So if we look at how it happened in 2017 after Park Geun-hye's impeachment, the conservatives nominated a candidate through some process that looked at both opinion polls and then delegate votes. And I think we'll have a very similar process as this time. We're probably months, it would be late spring, summer by the time we're looking at a snap election on a fast timeline, and a lot could change between then and now. The early names floated. Who knows what skeletons they might have in the closet? New people will emerge. As Andrew said, there are different perspectives on how to take the party forward among the conservatives. So that will need to play out.
Okay, outstanding. I mean, it seems like an eternity, but it also seems fast, right? It's this very strange, dualistic concept here of time. By the way, the last time I saw Oh Se-hyun was at a Doosan Bears game, just about a year ago. So anyway, I just had to get that in there.
You had to bring in the Doosan Bears.
I had to get it in. Had to get it in. Okay, let's shift quickly to foreign policy. We got about 10 minutes left. Andrew, obviously, Victor has said on this show, and I'll paraphrase that at the exact moment Korea needs a strong head of state to come to Washington or to Mar-a-Lago, as the case may be, to get into these top-to-top meetings with President Trump to advance Korea's interests, highlight investment in the U.S., things of that nature. There's now a political vacuum, right? And so that's point one. Point two is then we also have, the North Korea issue, right? In terms of, what does all this mean there? Can you unpack those two, the implications of those two different relationships and the domestic political issues upon those?
Yeah. So, Mark, if you were speaking 6 or 7 weeks ago, the whole idea would have been that the Yoon government would have put its best front foot forward to try to have meetings with Trump, to send as many delegations as possible to Mar-a-Lago in advance of the upcoming inauguration. And there was this whole strategy to really showcase how South Korea is an important ally to the United States. And they felt that Yoon would be the right person to do it. He'd had experience 2.5 years in office already. The thinking was he was going to continue to champion the U.S., Japan, Korea trilateral. And now he's out of the picture. And because, there's an interim government, an interim president right now, Choi Sang-muk, who's doing a fantastic job domestically, but it does mean that he can't really be the face of South Korea to the rest of the world during this moment of political crisis.
Can I come in just quickly, not to interrupt you, but also I would also argue that in addition to, being the messenger in Yoon Suk Yeol, I think Korea is in a very different situation than it was in 2016 with all of this foreign investment that's accumulated over the past, 6 to 8 years, right? In terms of tens, hundreds even of billions of dollars into the U.S., that's something to talk about with the president, right?
Yeah, certainly. The President Trump, he talks money, and we're talking in the last 3 years, $114 billion in South Korean investment to the United States. And that's something that Yoon would definitely have wanted to highlight. And, there's different ways of still doing that. There was, the CEO of Shinsegae, it's a department store in South Korea, was able to go to Mar-a-Lago and reportedly did meet with Trump, but it's different when it's a leader versus, a business person. So there is some concern when I was in South Korea last week in Seoul about Korea. That's the term that Koreans use, Korea passing. That is, Korea is going to be passed up. That Trump isn't going to really be able to. He'll talk about Japan again, but Korea will be an afterthought. There's one journalist was saying that Trump really likes to take advantage of opportunities and situation, and while Korea is kind of down and politically down, that he might take advantage of South Korea in its moment of weakness. I'm probably a bit more optimistic than Victor is, though. If you look at the broad scheme of things, I think the alliance will survive, even if, there's concerns about what happens if the Democratic Party comes back to power. Is it going to lead to more friction with Washington? And regardless of which party comes to power, if there's special elections held, the ruling party, the opposition, they understand that they have to work with the United States, that there's going to be that the United States is South Korea's most important ally. So I don't see, the wheels falling off the lines. And even with U.S., Japan, Korea trilateral, yes, Yoon was going to be the champion of this, and he wanted, he very much would have continued working with Japan. But Lee Jae-myung, when I was in Korea last week, he met with Japan's ambassador to South Korea, and this was reported in the news, and he said all the right things. He said that he finds the U.S., Japan, Korea trilateral relation important. The Japan-South Korea relationship is important as well, too. These are things he wants to continue. Of course, he mentioned the history issues. He said that he'd like to see Japan, move a bit forward on those issues as well, too. But he sort of said the right things about the trilateral. Now, the devil's in the details, and he's not president right now, so who knows what may happen when he's actually ruling. But for the time being, at least, I feel that Korea will come out okay. And I know I don't mean to, be too dismissive or passé about, the political turmoils and the tensions that may still occur between the Trump administration and South Korea on things like tariffs or on the alliance burden share agreement, the special measures agreement. Because yes, Trump is going to ask those things, but I think Koreans they have their talking points. You've seen the Instagram that they posted on. Here are all the things why South Korea is so important to the U.S. And I'll just give one specific example and maybe stop there. There's fears that Trump is going to, withdraw U.S. troops from the peninsula if, he doesn't get if the dollar amount isn't right. For the U.S. and the way things are looking in terms of the Trump administration and policy in the Indo-Pacific, it's pretty clear that we're going to have a much more hawkish policy towards China, especially on the military front. But if the United States wants to sustain that and make America great within the region and to come out ahead in great power competition, you need U.S. force presence in Asia. And South Korea, the Korean Peninsula, is the only place where there are U.S. forces on continental Asia. It'll be very hard for Trump to justify, removing these forces or relocate. And if you're going to relocate them, where? Where are you going to put, there's 28,500 troops in Korea. Let's say you remove a third, 7, 8,000. Where are you going to place these troops? So I do think Koreans have some leverage. They have some wiggle room there. And even in terms of investments, I don't know if the level of investments will continue as they did during the Yoon Biden era. In fact, it may be difficult because things like batteries or electric vehicles, these things have to sell in the United States. So if they're not selling over Trump, the Trump administration is not giving tax breaks, they may not sell, and that leaves a question for Koreans of should they continue to invest more in the United States. So there are these questions that remain unanswered, but again, in the broad scheme of things, I'm not too concerned about South Korean foreign policy or its relationship with the United States.
Finally, a glass half full person to counter Victor on this show. So I'm just very happy to see that. No, and excellent intervention. Just maybe two things on my end, then Tim, over to you. One, on Japan, I think much was made last time on the Comfort Women Agreement and Jisomia, and both ended up surviving. right? And here too, I think I'm in the half full camp as well, and I think that undergirds number one even more this time around. I think what you're hearing from the Trump team this time around, it's a slight difference, and I don't want to overstate it, is more of, I would say, let's put it this way, less acerbic, direct rhetoric at allies, right? There's some, right? But I think the volume is down. And I think part of that is the import that you talked about, Andrew, on China, right? And so I think that does give room for some optimism as well. All right, Tim, over to you for your thoughts here.
Yeah, I guess very quickly on foreign policy, I think I sort of generally agree with Andrew, what Andrew had to say and what you just mentioned. I wouldn't put myself necessarily in the glass full or glass half empty camp, but I think that last point you were making, Mark, is sort of the swing variable for the U.S.-South Korea relationship, especially if Lee Jae-myung becomes president, which is China. How far, obviously, the U.S. has a far more aggressive posture than a Lee Jae-myung-led South Korea would on Beijing. Very famously at one point, Lee Jae-myung had said, why can't we just say "shei" to China? So I think with Lee Jae-myung broadly, he's undergoing this evolution, or at least the people close to him are trying to project him as someone who's become more of a pragmatist in recent years. I sat down with him last month for an interview, and that was a big part of his foreign policy messaging. He said he would love to talk to Trump. He says that he sees the Ukraine issue and North Korea very similarly to President Trump, and if there are breakthroughs in that direction, he would love to nominate President Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize. I think taking a step back, one of the questions you had was on North Korea, and this would be, if you're not paying too close attention, a perfect moment for Pyongyang to seize this opportunity. Seoul's distracted. There's a leadership vacuum, uncertainty. But if they do something, it would actually only verify the very threat that President Yoon has warned about and then sort of justified his martial law decree on. So I think if you were to ask North Koreans, would you rather have Lee Jae-myung as president, who would prioritize engagement, or President Yoon, who said you achieve peace through strength? I think they would very clearly prefer Lee Jae-myung. So I think on North Korea, they have their own set of variables, fighting on the front lines in Russia, dealing with Trump 2.0. As tempting as it might be, I'm not hearing a lot of concern that North Korea will do something radical at this moment.
Okay, I'll say we've got to leave it there. We are at time. I don't feel like paying John Hamry more money to keep us on the air at this point, but I'm kidding, of course. But just a big thank you, tour de force from both Tim and Andrew. I really appreciate the insights, really appreciate the analysis, really appreciate the prognostications. I think it's just been really helpful for all of us here who are trying to make sense out of a pretty complicated legal and political situation in South Korea and its ramifications. So again, appreciate it. Thanks again, Andrew. Thanks again, Timothy. We will see everybody in a couple of weeks. And I did get my Doosan Bears reference in the show. So there you go. Thanks, everybody.
Pleasure to be here, Mark, and great to see you, Tim. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.